23. The warning sirens in the hold of the dropship began to howl. Their screaming ululations struck into the marrow of those gathered near the shattered hull and even into the closed cockpits of the battle mechs. Hands pressed against his ears, Parker DeVood stepped through the access port into the hold and staggered to the rent in the side. He was yelling something, but the screech of the sirens drowned out the words. When the sirens stopped abruptly, DeVood's voice was suddenly loud in the stillness. "Really close! The mechs are really close! The sensors picked them up!" While the others had been involved in unraveling the philosophical conundrum of the status of the humans, the Locust and the Tatate, DeVood had been on the flight deck of the dropship. He had engaged what was left of the sensors after the crash and begun to search the distance. When the telltale blips of heat had appeared on the IR screen, he tried to communicate with the desk team and the mechs, but the sending unit would not accept power. The siren had been his last resort. It did have a marvelous way of attracting attention. "How close?" asked Takuda, his mind still assaulted by the sound. "Can't get an accurate fix," replied DeVood, "but they're close enough for me to get a solid impression." "We're dead meat in the open like this," said Goodall from her perch on the shoulders of the Locust. She had climbed out of the cockpit during the discussion. If the Locust's appearance had powerfully affected the Tatate, the appearance of a human from the side of the head of the alien deity had been a real shocker. Arsenault and Jacobs had also evacuated their cockpit. Takuda looked around at the bare ground. Their defensive position, strong in its ability to deliver long-range fire against any attack from the woods, was suddenly vulnerable. Now the dropship sat like a center ring on a dartboard, an absolute magnet for any attack. Goodall was right. Standing in the open against 3 mechs would only get everyone killed, including the Tatate. And the Tatate were now a consideration in any plans. Takuda would have liked to tell everyone to die in place, but the Tatate would do just that, and the desk commander felt the extra weight of responsibility for the furry, helpless beings. This being a god was more than just a formal tea that led to a philosophical discussion. This was the real thing. Along with absolute power came absolute responsibility. Takuda was a qualified mech pilot, but he hated the iron monsters. They gave you plenty of weapons and armor, but you also sacrificed individual flexibility. Not only that, you also became a bullet attractor for the other side. He much preferred the vulnerability of his own body to the loss of control that armor gave. That was why he decided to remain a lowly foot soldier, turning down the chance to command a mech lance when the post had been offered many years before. He looked up at Goodall. "We'll have to leave the mechs behind. They're too much of a liability. We can evade in the woods on foot." Goodall glanced around the clearing. Abandoning mechs was not something she was willing to do unless the situation was really desperate, and she didn't have that feeling just yet. Her mech was clear of the dropship, and she mentally calculated the time required to get the second Locust free. There was a chance, but someone would have to pilot the other mech. "Parker," she said, turning to the dropship commander, "do you still have power for the ship's weapons targeting array?" DeVood thought for a moment before answering. "I have power, but that won't help. You and Vost both knew the weapons themselves are out of commission." "Vost won't know whether we've repaired the weapons or not. Just initiate the sequence. Vost will see the emission, and it may make him think twice. That will slow him down. Anything to make him stop and wonder." She looked down at Takuda. "I think we can save the mechs. If someone can pilot the other one, I think we can at least get free. If we get into the woods, we may have a chance." "That's no good," said Takuda with a shrug. "I can't let Arsenault pilot the Locust. He's too valuable as a section leader. Can't afford to have a good man trapped in something he can't fight." I can do it. It was Jacob's.
At least I can try.
He paused as his eyes met those of Takuda.
I can pilot a mech. I've been trained. I can do it. It wasn't on one of these, but I understand how they work. I can do it. Really, I can.
Takuda thought for a moment. Jacobs was a null as far as he was concerned. Neither an asset nor a liability in the team's survival equation. If he were lost, the sum would not change. It was worth the gamble.
All right, Jacobs, he said. If you think you can get the Mech 3, try it. But remember,
he said, looking straight at Goodall,
we're not going to sacrifice ourselves for the mechs. Understand that.
Roger last, said the pilot. Mechs would be on their own. If they were to become part of the team, they would have to survive on their own merits. Goodall was sure that she could do it, but she wasn't so sure that Jacobs and the other Locusts would do as well. All they could do was try. Mech pilots were individualistic in the extreme, and mercenary mech pilots a step even beyond that. But Goodall felt the emotional draw to any other mech. She would do her best to keep Jacobs alive. It was a challenge she was willing to accept. "We'll be right behind you, sir." The old habit of command slipped into place. Takuda was the boss now, and she'd follow his orders. Jacobs was already in the command seat of the Locust, lifting one giant metal leg tentatively to clear the edge of the shattered hull. Arsenault was on the ground, helping Lost with his gear. The wounded man would need assistance if he were to clear the area before the heavy weapons began to shoot. Despite the heavy sedation they'd given him, he was whimpering from the pain. Lost, like the other wounded members of the group, would be a serious liability when the running started. He would be better as a shooter, but that would mean having to leave him behind if they had to make a run for it. The foot of the Locust came down on the ground, and Jacobs shifted the mech's weight to the outside leg. Gingerly, he lifted the other one and began to extract it. There was no way he could brace himself, for the Locust had no arms. "Brace yourself with the last bar," came the suggestion through the earpiece of his communicator. Goodall was giving as much help as she could. "Just hold it against the side of the ship. Don't push too hard or you'll bend the activator tube. Get the crystals out of alignment and it'll be useless. Just enough to steady yourself. Gently now." Jacobs rotated the Locust's torso until the laser came in contact with the ship. That felt more stable, and he moved the inner leg again. He watched as the foot came almost clear of the side, but he couldn't get it quite over the lip. "Stop!" came Goodall's voice over the comm line. "Stop the leg." He obeyed. "Now activate the foot to swing it clear. Lock the foot in its full back position. Remember to unlock it when you're clear. You don't want to put it down while frozen." Jacobs paused to absorb the instructions. He was getting too much information too soon. He'd have to be careful. Outside the hull of the dropship, the desk team was making final plans for evacuation. The real problem was the heavy equipment. With the heavy weapons section reduced to only 2 members, they had more than enough to carry. They'd broken up the loads among the unwounded desk members, but that only gave them 4 more bearers. There was just too much. They'd have to leave something behind. "Let us help you," said Dakota. The Tatate was still there, not a single one having made a move to flee. They stood there shuffling back and forth, watching the humans. Takuda had completely forgotten about them, assuming that they would already have headed for the woods. Now they intruded on his already busy brain. "We are small, but there are many of us," continued Dakota. "Each one of us can carry something." Dakota wanted to ask many questions. Where will you take it? How much can each of you carry? Will it all get to the right place at the right time? Will you damage it when you carry it? Too many questions, too little time.
"Do it,"
he said. Dakota turned to the other two who were standing with him. He rattled off a string of musical gibberish. There was a brief response from the others, followed by another stream of the same sort of stuff. The little Tatate, the one who had been identified as Totito, turned to the tribe, gave a short command, and then the gaggle of Tatate exploded into action. They swept around Takuta like a wave of fur and feathers and beaks and legs. Before he could give an order, before he could even think about giving an order, the Tatate were into the pile of equipment. As if by magic, the stores vanished, carried toward the woods by an army of ants. There was nothing left for the desk team to shoulder. Dakota stood quiet amid the commotion, his eyes following the activity with benign indifference. When quiet reigned once more, he was left with two of his brethren, who stood bobbing and silent behind them. "These will ride with your machines. They will show them where to go. There are holes in the hills that can hide them if necessary. This one is Potate, and this one is Keotate." He turned to issue short commands to the two Tatate, who still bobbed and nodded. Without hesitation, each chose a locust and scrambled up the leg to settle alongside the earpiece formed by the heavy machine gun mount. It was time to go. In the distance, the Panther was visible over the trees, suddenly respectful of the dropship's fire control system. Overhead, the Lamb orbited just out of PPC range, waiting for an opening to develop. Takuta knew that sooner or later Vost and Seagroves would guess the fire control system was a hoax, and then they would move in for the kill. The last of the Foot Mobile desk members were nearing the woods, the wounded supported by Tatate. Takuta signaled the locusts to begin their withdrawal. Jacobs went first, his mech moving slowly as he mastered the controls. The mech swayed wildly as he misjudged the terrain, and Takuta could see the Tatate guide holding on with all four appendages while it chattered instructions at the confused pilot. The mech steadied and continued to move. Then a burst of PPC fire from the Panther snapped overhead. Either Jacobs didn't notice or was unable to do anything about it. He continued on his way toward the trees at the foot of the gently sloping hill. Goodall waited until he was almost clear. Then she too began her retreat. She backed away, watching the movements of the Panther in her sensor screen while keeping track of the Lamb with her eyes. She didn't worry about the Panther. Her locust could move fast enough that the mech wouldn't be a real danger until it closed to short range. The Lamb was another problem entirely. With its speed, it could circle behind her and make a pass from the rear. Its triple lasers could rip the locust apart with a few well-aimed shots. Even lucky hits would be enough to slow her down. As the Lamb streaked away to begin the attack run, she craned her head to keep it in view. As it turned to make the attack, it all sprinted toward the woods. By moving perpendicular to the line of the attack, she hoped to give Seagroves the most difficult movement target possible. The Panther PPC fired again, this time ripping into the shattered hull of the dropship, which vibrated under the pounding. Goodall let the locust drop below the line of the hull, using it as shielding. PPC fired again, creating a fountain of incandescent sparks as the particles burned through the armor. A fire flashed into life in the abandoned cargo hold. Looking back, Goodall saw that the Lamb was making its attack, but she was not the target. Seagroves had either sensed or guessed that the other mech was not under full control. He had changed his point of aim from the locust in the open to the one partially hidden by the trees. Goodall sprinted down the hill to reach a range where she could defend the vulnerable Jacobs and his mech. The Tatate guide hung on, its body pounding against the armor of the hull. The Lamb screamed in for the attack.